Hi, I'm Heidi Hewitt, AutoCAD Technical Marketing Manager at Autodesk, and I'm here with Rick Ellis, CAD consultant, trainer, and author. Rick, with dimensional constraints and geometric constraints in AutoCAD, do you have any best practices to offer our viewers for how to use those together?
Sure, there's a couple things that are really good to keep in mind. If you're going to use dimensional and geometric constraints together, it's usually best to apply the geometric constraints first and then apply your dimensional constraints after that.
So I have to ask what's going to happen if you don't do that? If you do your dimensional constraints without having the appropriate geometric constraints applied?
It depends on what constraints you have applied. So it's hard to say exactly what you're going to experience, but you can have that dimensional constraint override some of your geometric ones in some cases. The other thing to remember when you're putting those together, particularly when you're adding the dimensional constraint, is that if you pick 2 points to dimension, you want to make sure that you pick the first point that you want to have fixed, and the second point is the point that's going to move, or the piece of geometry that's going to move when you update the value of that dimension, because that's going to determine the direction of either the stretching or the shortening of that particular object.
So, for example, maybe if you're applying a linear dimension between two lines, and you pick the two lines as the objects that you're dimensioning,
yes,
the first one that you pick stays there, and the second one moves based on that value you enter.
Yes, exactly. So it's the order that you pick things is really important, but it doesn't take very long until you get really used to the order that you should pick them in, knowing that the first one I'm holding, the second one I'm moving, almost like a match properties in some cases.
Oh, that's a great analogy. Yeah, I like that. Okay, and any other best practices? How about constraint forms? Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Absolutely. There's actually two different forms of dimensional constraints, dynamic and annotational. With dynamic, that's more of a modeling type tool, and it won't plot, and you don't really have any control over what that dimensional constraint looks like. With annotational constraints, you have control over the layer that dimensional constraint is on, and the dimension style, and all the things that you're used to working with within the dimension style. And it will plot, because it would be kind of silly for you to have to apply a dimensional constraint and then also have a regular dynamic dimension on top of that at the same time, just for plotting purposes. Now the good news is you don't have to decide which one of these types of dimensional constraints you want to use at the beginning of the process, because you can change easily by just selecting a dimensional constraint and going to the AutoCAD Properties Manager and switching from dynamic to annotational or annotational to dynamic.
So just a quick switch of the properties and you've got either one of those.
Either one, and then you have a constraint that you can also plot.
Smart dimensions. Okay, great. Thanks, Rick.